Right, I'm going live now. Yes, and we are live. 1 minute early, which is good. So I'm joined here again with Michael Liebowitz, and we're just basically picking up on our previous discussion. I believe we ended off on discussing the role of induction and axioms and deduction in objectivist epistemology. I suppose you want to just like reintroduce yourself in case somebody didn't see the previous stream.
Sure. I'm Michael Liebowitz. I'm the host of the Rational Egoist. I'm active on Twitter, and I like to have fruitful debates.
Absolutely. So I think the crux of our disagreement last time, if I'm remembering correctly, was I considered the law of causality to be validated deductively. Now, I agree that the way little Johnny, like a little child or whatever, would come to grasp that there are laws in the universe is he'd be looking out and he would be seeing that there are these causal relationships. But I think that you can only have a valid theory of induction if you already presume the more fundamental metaphysical axioms. And if you have those axioms, then you can just make a very simple deduction from identity into causality.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's important to clarify is that the debate isn't over whether this is the appropriate process. The debate is over whether objectivism teaches this. That whether in objectivism it's a deductive process to arrive at the law of identity and the law of causality, or an inductive process, that's the discussion. I mean, we could have the other discussion. I'm okay with that too. But the disagreement we had last time was about about what is taught according to objectivism.
Sure. So then, I mean, even on that, we can go into open closed system at some point, I suppose, if it gets there. But I think even just with the current objectivist literature, like, I mean, Leonard Peikoff in his Axioms of Induction lecture, the first one, he disclaims that causality is arrived at through induction, that you learn about causality through induction. He considers it to be deduction because induction is based upon having these axioms already. Now, you don't have these axioms inborn or anything. You get those axioms by looking out, right? But it's not anything like, I just see causality and I just see these things like that. That doesn't properly validate that this is a necessary relationship. Like that doesn't address Hume properly.
Okay, in the lecture you're talking about, it's well, I don't know if it's the one you're talking about specifically, but in his lecture, Objectivism Through Induction, in the 49th minute, and this is a direct quote, he says, "I say to you, you cannot deduce causality from identity." That's a direct quote in the 49th minute from Leonard Peikoff. You cannot do it. He also says in OPAR, page 8, one knows that the axioms are true, not by inference of any kind, but by sense perception. He also says, page 8, the validation of axioms, however, is the simplest of all, sense perception. He also says about causality, nor is a corollary a theorem. I mean, about corollaries, nor is a corollary a theorem. It does not permit or require a process of proof. Like an axiom, it is self-evident once its context has been grasped. And again, proof consists in reducing an idea back to the data provided by the senses. None of that has anything to do with deductive proofs. That's all Leonard Peikoff.
Right, so I'm specifically referring to a lecture which is titled The Axioms of Induction.
Okay.
And in the question period of that lecture, he's asked about his position on this, and he says, I used to say this thing, where it's just pure induction, but now I disagree with that stance.
Okay, I haven't seen it. I don't know that specific. If you can, if do you have it where you can play it? Is it keyed up or anything?
I would have to find like the timestamp or whatever. I can send it to you later, I suppose.
But I would also say this, that even if Leonard Peikoff changes his mind, if he's not teaching what Ayn Rand said, then that's Leonard Peikoff's view. But objectivism proper is the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And this is Ayn Rand. The process of observing the facts of reality and of integrating them into concepts is, in essence, a process of induction. The process of subsuming new instances of a known concept is, in essence, a process of deduction. So the process of all in deduction is bringing new instances under an already established concept. It's not validating, and it's not forming new concepts.
Sure. So, I mean, then I suppose we're in the realm of, is objectivism just whatever Rand said about philosophy? I would consider, no, it's not just whatever Rand said about philosophy. You can deduce corollaries of axioms. Like that's what a corollary is. It's something which is just readily, it can be deduced from something, right? You can certainly do that.
According to objectivism, though. And I'm not familiar with the lecture that you're talking about where he repudiates what he had previously taught. I do know what he says in the lecture that I listened to. I do know what he says in Understanding Objectivism. I know what he said in OPAR. I know what Ayn Rand said in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. And I know Peikoff in private conversations with people because I know people have talked to him what he taught about it. So I don't know. I have differences, for instance, with Ayn Rand on her definition of value, for instance. So I believe that her definition of value is not consistent with the teachings of value as an objective concept. However, my development or my clarification of it does not make my teaching objectivism. That doesn't become a part of objectivism. I agree with you that takes us into a different debate about what the open and closed debate, where let me just say I'm firmly in the closed camp. But I still don't have anything from Leonard Peikoff. I mean, if you can find it, if you can show where he repudiates the idea that you can't do that, validation isn't a deductive process, I'm certainly willing to listen, and then we can actually debate whether or not it is.
Sure. So we can leave that on the side for now, because I can't pull up the timestamp at the moment, but I can send it to you afterwards or whatever.
Okay, sure.
But I think it could be interesting to go into the open closed discussion if you're down for that.
Sure.
Yeah. So like the way I see objectivism is that it's not Ayn Randism. And now Ayn Rand herself, she didn't like it being called Ayn Randism, right? There's this interviewer called it Randism, and she was like, no, it's not Randism, it's objectivism. Mm-hmm. Now that's already signaling to me, okay, right, this isn't just whatever Ayn Rand happens to believe. There's some essential here. Now, is the essential that Ayn Rand believed it, or something else? And I'm saying it's something else. There's an actual science being done here. And that science is applying the primacy of existence to philosophy. If it's applying the primacy of existence explicitly, then it is objectivist. Then that's what makes objectivism different from every other philosophy before it. Like even Aristotle never explicitly identified and applied the primacy of existence. He still had a primacy of consciousness in his prime mover, right? So that is what I consider to be objectivist. And then you certainly could develop objectivism beyond Ayn Rand, right?
Okay. Well, first, why did she say she didn't want it called Randism? There's a reason she gave, and it has nothing to do with whether it's an open or closed system. What she said is, I'm far too conceited for that. She didn't want people running around calling themselves objectivism. And she also said in relation to Leonard Peikoff's course, unless and until I write a full statement of my philosophy, this is the definitive course. Meaning that somebody else can't just come along and alter it, change it. And she also didn't even want people calling themselves objectivists, but students of objectivism, because she was so concerned that it would be misrepresented, that her philosophy, her viewpoint would be changed. And if it's subject to change in that way, you run into the problem. Then what are we talking about? So if you and I, for instance, if we get into the debate, okay, in objectivism, does objectivism teach that causality and identity are simple deductions that start with the axiom of existence? Well, if the argument then isn't what objectivist teaches, because if you say, well, objectivist is an open system, well, then you and I come to two completely different conclusions, and who's to decide? I mean, obviously somebody would be right and somebody would be wrong, but we're talking about what it would be according to objectivism. Like, could somebody come along and say, well, I've discovered, that Ludwig von Mises is right. Values are subjective. Rand was wrong, but I'm going to incorporate that with the rest of her philosophy and now call that objectivism and say values are subjective. I would hold, no, you cannot. That's not objectivism.
Sure. So I think that counter argument works against a weaker formulation of the open system, where it's just, anything goes or whatever. There are certain people who hold that, or a version of it, at least. I think there is an actual standard here for whether it is objectivist. So if we came to different conclusions on some part, like, so you say that perhaps, I don't know if you do say this, by the way, that the state is justified, and then I say the state is unjustified. Now, how can we figure out which one of us is properly adhering to objectivism? Well, in my view, it would be whoever's applying the primacy of existence. And I think I'm the one applying the primacy of existence here. And that would be the proper objectivist theory there. Now, there is the concern here that it's a frozen concept. I don't think it is a frozen concept. It would be a frozen concept if I said objectivism is when you're doing true philosophy. But I'm not saying that. I'm saying objectivism is when you're applying explicitly the primacy of existence.
Well, let's take the instance of the state, for instance. Right or wrong, and the problem is you have to get into what you mean by state and all that, but I want to skip that for a second, because Ayn Rand clearly believed that government was necessary, that it was necessary to have a organization that had a monopoly on the use of retaliatory force. That's clear as day in her teaching. Roy Childs comes along and says, well, objectivism actually implies anarchy. If Roy Childs is right, then objectivism has a problem when it comes to its political theory. And we could say objectivist political theory is wrong. I wouldn't say it, but I'm saying the anarchist, like Stefan Kinsella, for instance, could say, well, objectivism is wrong when it comes to politics. But you couldn't then jump in, develop an ANCAP system clearly goes against the teachings of the person that created the philosophy.
Let's, like, where else do we apply this sort of standard to systems of thought? Like, we don't apply in physics. The theory of relativity was definitely expand beyond Einstein and contradicted some of the things Einstein said. We don't see it in, my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully that's not too bad.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. We don't apply in biology. Like, the theory of evolution has certainly expanded beyond the time of Darwin, right? Like, we don't apply this anywhere else. Why should we apply it in philosophy?
Well, I would disagree that we don't apply it anywhere else. You wouldn't call something, you might, for instance, like you have Platonism, right? Now somebody might come along and alter that, and then you say this is Neoplatonism or Neo-Aristotelianism or Neo-Kantianism or any other ism that you come along with, whether it be Neo-Keynesianism, Neo-Marxism, whatever. But that doesn't alter, it doesn't then become the original philosophy. That's why we end up with the prefix neo, because it's a new version of it.
Sure. So if they're altering some sort of fundamentals, and I'll leave it up to the Platonists to decide what they think is fundamental to Platonism, and I'll leave up to the Kantians to decide what they think is fundamental to Kant, right? I'll leave it to them to figure out, but I'm an objectivist, so I'm going to figure out what's fundamental to objectivism. And if I were to alter that fundamental, if I were to say, in this certain situation, we actually can have a primacy of consciousness or whatever, right? If I said that, then yeah, I'm no longer an objectivist. And the same thing is happening in political theory, in my view. Whenever anybody, you can have all sorts of errors in your philosophy and still be a libertarian. But if you are rejecting the non-aggression principle, then I no longer consider you a libertarian. That is the standard I'm applying across the board. And I've just worked out the fundamental for objectivism. I haven't worked it out for Platonism or anything like that because I don't really care.
So, just as an aside, so you wouldn't then consider von Mises a libertarian or Henry Hazlitt a libertarian?
Not if they've rejected the non-aggression principle. I wouldn't.
Well, they believed in a utilitarian ethic. They wouldn't adhere to any principle like that.
So to be clear, Mises' utilitarianism isn't quite what is normally meant by utilitarianism. I will defend Mises a little bit on that point. His utilitarianism is basically like, all right, well, if we're going to have prosperity, and I think prosperity is probably something we can all agree to, then we got to have property rights and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that was his idea. I think that's a very weak justification of the non-aggression principle, but he's still trying to uphold property rights in some way.
Well, sure, but he also believed that morality is a fiction, that it's not real, that there's no objective standards of morality, and the non-aggression principle is a moral standard. I mean, it's not a standard; it's a moral principle.
Sure, and that is basically him, being bad and not properly grounding his beliefs.
Well, he may be so, but he doesn't adhere to the principle. You would have to say he's not a libertarian then. And I don't know on what basis libertarianism is such a broad term that applies to so many different things. I don't know how you can exclude. I don't know who gets to decide who's excluded or on what fundamental somebody's allowed to be excluded, because like I said, it's such a broad theory, a broad idea in libertarianism. But in that kind of, like, if you look at libertarianism, right? Libertarianism is not the creation of one person. It's not somebody's philosophy. It's a word that's been applied to very different viewpoints, very different philosophies. You have left libertarians, right libertarians. And I know then someone comes along and said, if you're left, you're not really a libertarian. Paleo libertarians, for instance. There's so many different varieties. But none of those are the creation of one person. Objectivism is the creation of Ayn Rand, or the developed philosophy. I mean, I'm fine with creation too. But nonetheless, and she had specific things in mind for her philosophy. So to deviate, now you say, well, as long as it's the fundamentals, but it seems that the only fundamental you have is the axiom of existence.
More specifically, the primacy of existence. So you can,
the primacy of existence. Yeah. But given that people are not, so what I'm looking for here, omniscient, two people can hold to the supremacy of existence, repudiate the supremacy of consciousness, be fully committed to reason, and still come to different conclusions because they're mistaken. And then which one is part of objectivism?
Well, whichever one is wrong, maybe both of them are wrong, then neither of them are part of it.
But if you're having a discussion, with somebody, you have to represent what objectivism is, and then how do you do it? How do you say this is what objectivism is? You've got multiple viewpoints. Now you might come along and say, well, this is the right one. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, this is the right one. Then someone else comes along and says, no, this is the right one. And then how are we able to?
If they're not me, then they're wrong, right? So why would I concern somebody can come along and say the sky is green? Like, I don't give a shit.
Well, no, they can. Well, as much as I appreciate your confidence, nonetheless, if we're trying to communicate what this philosophy is, it has to be something. It has to have an identity. And if we introduce all kinds of new innovations into it, then it no longer has that.
Well, no, it certainly can have an identity, because if it is just the philosophy which explicitly identifies and applies the primacy of existence, then objectivism is set in stone at that point. It is what it is, right?
But it's so much more than that. That's another part of the problem is with like David Kelly went through a list of his fundamentals that you have to have in order to be an objectivist. I don't remember what they are. It doesn't really matter. But the point is he had so many of them. But I mean, you have to have not only the supremacy of existence, but you also have to have the law of causality. You have to have in there that a reason as man's means of survival, the concept formation. I mean, can you get rid of measurement emission as part of concept formation? Is that not fundamental? I mean, that's her whole. That's her theory of universals. You have to have a conceptual common denominator to distinguish one concept from the next. I don't know how that's not fundamental and doesn't have to be in there, or how it's not fundamental. Egoism isn't a fundamental part of the philosophy. Those things are to say you could have objectivism without those things. I don't know how you arrive at that or how you could ever get there.
Sure. So basically, I consider, you listed three there: causality, reason as man's means of survival, and concept formation. I consider all of those to be applications of the primacy of existence. So in causality, that's metaphysics. So you apply the primacy of existence, existence exists, and then you have the law of identity. And from that, you get to the law of causality, right? So that's boom, right there, where you've got primacy of existence leading to causality, primacy of existence in ethics with reason of man's means of survival. Man can't just wish things away. He can't just pretend that his problems don't exist and then they go away. So he has to actually be acknowledging the real world. He can't be whim worshipping, because he can't. If he's evading, then he's not paying attention to reality and he can't survive, right? So reason as man's means of survival, primacy of existence again, and concept formation again. He has to be looking out and forming these concepts. That's where the empiricism comes in, right? It's all primacy of existence.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead. My bad.
No, that's me finished. I'm just saying it's all primacy of existence. All the way down.
Existence can exist without consciousness. You don't have to have consciousness to have existence. So to say because you have existence, you just deduce from existence.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, you said that you just have existence, and that implies all these other things, but it doesn't.
No, to be clear, I'm not just saying you start with existence exists, then you deduce all of objectivism. I'm not making that claim. I'm making the claim that you are applying the primacy of existence to all of these different, very broad abstractions. That's what philosophy is, the broadest abstractions possible. And you're applying the primacy of existence to each of these different areas. And that is the objectivist method.
If what you're saying, and I think it is, I don't know that I don't think I would disagree. If all you're saying is that you have to apply the axioms to that the axioms are involved in any learning process. Well, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. But that doesn't mean that those are well, I guess that would be the fundamental. I'm not going to disagree with that, but I think that also if fundamental to objectivism are all those other things that we talked about. I mean, what I mean by fundamental in this sense is this: you can't have objectivism if you don't have reason as man's means of survival. You can't have objectivism if you don't have egoism, right? So, would you include all of those things as fundamental? Could, for instance, somebody come along, if somebody could prove it and show that egoism is not consistent, that there's a contradiction. Suppose, for instance, they came along with a proof that free will was non-existent, that we are all just determined, right? So would you then say that could be a part of objectivism?
If they were applying the primacy of existence, then yes, sure. That is the correct objectivist position.
Okay, and I would say absolutely not. And I don't know how the two of us can resolve it, because it's just objectivism is the philosophy of Ayn Rand, and once you stray from that, there's no sort of point at which you can stop straying from it and still be objectivism. Somebody says it and somebody proves it. To be clear,
there is a limit. There is the limit there, which is what is actually contained within applying the primacy of existence. Right, so it is still going to be limited. It's not just whatever somebody wants.
But in that case, then objectivism is not falsifiable. If objectivism is an open system in the manner in which you say, and it's all just the application of the supremacy of existence, so as long as you keep that, you're okay, then nothing further developed from the axiom of existence could refute objectivism. It would be impossible.
Well, basically, what you're saying there is it's non-contradictory. Like,
no, it's not all.
If you start with this point and then you deduce from it, and nothing beyond this could ever.
Hold on a second. You said you're not deducing from it, though. Now you're saying you're deducing from it. So that's what I didn't make that
claim. You, to be clear, you made the claim that nothing you ever deduce from it could ever negate the previous thing you're deducing from.
No, you said earlier on. I'm sorry, but you said that you're not saying that the entire philosophy is deduced from existence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're sticking with that. It's not deduced from existence, right?
Yep.
So if objectivism makes a claim, say about the nature of man, right? Now, if something comes along, now those are basically hypotheses. They're true, and I think they're demonstrably true, but they have to be proven. They have to be validated. You can't just reference back and say, well, this is just an application of existence. You actually have to prove them. But if you're going to prove it, you have to put yourself out there to falsifiability. Somebody needs to be able to actually debate with you. There needs to be a possibility. And by possibility, I mean hypothetical, not because what's necessary is necessary. I'm not saying that it actually is possible. What I'm saying is that if I make a claim that says that man has free will, for instance, and then you prove that not you prove that wrong. What I mean is, if I say man has free will, but there's no observation on the planet, nothing could possibly ever happen that would cause me to say I'm wrong. Or if I say that capitalism is the most moral system and capitalism protects individual rights, and here's why, and then somebody can say, no, it isn't, and they can propose an argument why it's not. I have to be able to defend my position with more than just saying existence. You have to be able to prove it.
But I want to be clear here. When I'm saying primacy of existence, it's the application of the primacy of existence across the board. Mm-hmm. I'm not just saying you say existence exists in all these different branches and then that's it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm saying, because you can have Christian philosophy or medieval philosophy of the Christians, they would certainly agree that existence does exist. But they think that consciousness is more primary than existence. So it's not just acknowledging that existence exists. That's not fundamental to objectivism. That doesn't distinguish it from everything else.
Of existence, I agree.
It's that you start with existence. And this is across the board. So in metaphysics, obviously, in epistemology, you're starting with existence. So you can't just retreat into your mind and think up whatever innate ideas you want. Because existence has primacy. You have to be looking out. Right? In ethics, it's the same thing. In aesthetics, again, it's across the board. You're looking out. It is primacy of existence over consciousness. You are not self-sufficient just in your brain.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you. And let me just say that I know that when in my last points, I got off and I probably said things where I was mistaken. I know I wasn't clear because I wasn't clear to myself. So let me just confess that. But the ultimate point I'm trying to make here is that each implies everything else in objectivism. That's true because I happen to think that all the connections are correct. There's points at which, I shouldn't say they're all correct because there's points at which I disagree, but not in terms of fundamentals. The things where I disagree, though, I would say are not objectivism. But you're saying if I'm correct, then they would be part of objectivism. But all that's saying is that anything that happens to be true philosophically is part of objectivism, right?
Yes, but not by definition. It's not.
No, not by definition. I know you're not saying that. But you're saying if something happens to be true, that then becomes objectivism.
Yes, because objectivism is correct.
But then there's no way to ever say that objectivism then cannot be wrong.
No. This is why I want to be clear. It's not that I'm not freezing the abstraction here. I'm not freezing objectivism to truth. So if somebody could disprove somehow the primacy of existence, then objectivism is negated, right?
So all objectivism is then really is the primacy of existence in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay. I would disagree. I think Rand would disagree. I think Peikoff would disagree. But I don't know how you and I can resolve it. Because I'm not going to come to that conclusion. And I don't think you're going to come to my conclusion. Because I think objectivism is a full body of thought as developed by Ayn Rand. And anything outside of that would not be objectivism. If she happens to be wrong about something, then objectivism is wrong on that point. Like, I think objectivism is wrong on the definition of value. I think Leonard Peikoff clears that up pretty well in one of his lectures. But I still think that objectivism, when it comes to the definition of value, let me just be clear, not on the concept of value, not on the theory of ethics it takes. I just think that the definition of value of that which you seek to gain and or keep is a bad definition for an objective theory of value. That's what I mean. But that's still what objectivism teaches, that's the definition. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't need, you have the book, I have it here, Opar, for the philosophy of objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. But if it's something not the philosophy of Ayn Rand, then how is it objectivism? That's my view.
What I think Peikoff is incorrect to call it the philosophy of Ayn Rand. It certainly is the philosophy that she came up with. She came up with the primacy of existence. She explicitly identified it and applied it across the board. So in that sense, it's fine to call it the philosophy of Ayn Rand, but not in the sense of if Ayn Rand said it, then it's objectivism, because we don't use that standard anywhere else.
Well, you do. And Aristotelianism, I get she didn't call it
randism. Aristotelianism, that's the thing.
No, but there was a reason she didn't call it randism, and it had nothing to do with that. That's the point. But you have Platonism, Aristotelianism, Kantianism is a form of transcendental idealism, but you wouldn't use those terms. Like I said, that's why you have the neo. And if you want to say that this is neo-objectivism, then I would be fine. But to say it's objectivism proper, I would disagree. But again, I don't know how, you resolve such a discussion. I have no idea how.
It's like elsewhere, we have this in economic thought. There are plenty of people called Misesians who don't agree with Mises on literally every single thing in economics, right? But they're in the tradition of Ludwig von Mises, right? They're in specifically as against some of his contemporaries, right? And you can be an Aristotelian without, thinking that you need to apply a constant force to something to keep it moving, right? That isn't essential to the Aristotelian tradition, right? The same is true of every philosophy. You can be a Platonist in a certain way of analysis without agreeing on literally everything that Plato ever said, right? And this is why you can say that Aristotle had some Platonist leanings in certain parts of his philosophy, right? Peikoff says this, right? If we're going to be, discussing what Peikoff is classing philosophies as, he says that Aristotle is sometimes a little bit Platonist. Now, how can you get that if Platonist just means whatever Plato said? Because he didn't literally just repeat what Plato said. He was just kind of leaning in the world of forms idealism direction, right? As against the primacy of existence direction.
Well, back up a little bit to what you said. You said he's a little bit Platonist. He's not a Platonist. He's a little bit of a Platonist. If there's plenty of people that I would concede are influenced by objectivism, but I wouldn't call them objectivists. And you could say, well, there's some objectivist aspects to their thought, but the very idea of saying a little bit Platonist means that Platonist is something. It doesn't alter. It doesn't change. It is what it is.
Sure, and I don't think objectivism is what it is not.
So you would say then, that Harry Binswanger, Leonard Peikoff, Yaron Brook, that none of these people are objectivists?
No, they're all objectivists. They apply. They don't, because they have none of them, to my knowledge, have explicitly rejected the primacy of existence.
No, they've all rejected anarchism, though. But you say that anarchism properly is.
So to be clear, that's just a deviation from the proper objectivist line. Like that somebody makes an error in their philosophizing does not imply that they have rejected the root of what they're doing.
But would their error their error wouldn't be objectivist?
Yeah.
So minarchism, I know a lot of objectivists don't like the term. but a small government that's solely there to protect rights, you are saying that's not part of objectivism.
Mhm.
Okay, but they all would say it is, and they're actually
Yeah,
going
they're all
back
wrong.
to the root. Yeah, see, that's what I have the problem with, and I don't know how you can resolve it. I don't know. I know why I think that it's a mistake to take that approach, because it becomes impossible to communicate what objectivism is if everybody can have their own idea of what it is. But beyond that, I don't know how you settle that and prove it.
I mean, it's like, is this then just a strategic concern? Like, how are we going to communicate what objectivism is to other people?
Well, no, it's not only a strategic concern. No, I mean, it's also an epistemological concern for whenever you want to learn a concept and you want to learn what something is, it's important to grasp what it is, to fully understand it. So it's both strategic and epistemological.
I mean, it's like when I was learning objectivism, one of my friends, Nye, he like introduced me to it. It was never introduced as, oh, by the way, objectivism is just whatever Ayn Rand happened to believe. Like, if I heard that, I would be like, well, that's kind of a weak claim, right? If instead it was introduced as, hey, there's this thing called the primacy of existence, and what objectivism does is blah, 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 right? It applies it across the board. That's a far stronger claim. It's like, whoa, that's kind of interesting, right? I've been thinking this the whole time, and so finally somebody's saying it, you know? And it's the same in, I have more experience with libertarianism. Everybody's really confused about what a libertarianism is, but then I come along and I'm just like, okay, right, it's just the non-aggression principle, and the non-aggression principle means this specific thing, defined in praxeologic terms precisely, and then people, I've been messaged by many people saying, you've made it all clear, right? You've made it clear to me what it is that this is claiming, that you need this for any movement. You need to have an actual essential definition, just not just Ayn Randism or something like that.
Well, hold on. First of all, Leonard Peikoff himself says objectivism is a closed system. Yeah. Rand says it's a closed system. You seem to be saying that like you just said, well, I came along and I said, this is what libertarianism is. That doesn't make libertarianism that thing, because you said it is.
No, it already was that thing, and I didn't identify it.
No, but it's really not. I get that you're saying it is, but the non-aggression principle is, I mean, that might be, a big part of the modern libertarian movement. There have been plenty of libertarians who didn't adhere to it. Von Mises was one of them. Now we just said, well, von Mises wasn't a libertarian. Hayek wasn't a libertarian. Milton Friedman, not a libertarian. But you're going to end up getting rid of the bulk of libertarian economists if you make them adhere to the non-aggression principle.
So why is that a problem?
Why is it a problem to get rid of them? Because you're getting rid of the people who have shaped the very ideas of libertarianism. Libertarianism is a very broad. It's gotten so broad, but I don't even refer to myself that way.
Would you agree with the claim that Aristotle shaped the ideas of objectivism?
I would say it depends on what you mean by shaped, ultimately.
Like, if Aristotle had never been born, would you have objectivism?
I do. Would you have objectivism without Aristotle? I don't know, because that implies that you can't get it just by looking at reality, that you have to go through a mediator. I wouldn't.
Like, the question is sort of like, did Ayn Rand develop Aristotle's beliefs into a new philosophy?
I think that she did, because she says she was influenced by him, but that's a different question from saying, did he shape it?
Or
would there be an objectivism without him? I don't know.
I think a very similar thing is going on with like Ludwig von Mises and Milton Friedman and all these other types with respect to libertarianism. They certainly came up with a lot of great stuff, and that developed into libertarianism thanks to Murray Rothbard, right? But that we are rejecting them from the label libertarian doesn't mean that we are completely throwing them out and saying they had nothing good to say. Just as we can throw Aristotle away from the objectivist label. Aristotle was definitely not an objectivist, right?
But the term libertarian and the concept libertarianism predates Rothbard, and it predates the non-aggression principle.
Okay, the term capitalist was initially coined by Karl Marx to mean something evil, and Ayn Rand called herself a capitalist.
But they're referring to the same thing. They're referring to private ownership of the means of production. So it's the same thing.
No. I don't know precisely, but it was something to do with like, it it was like specifically exploitative was contained within.
That's what Marx said takes place under capitalism. But what capitalism is, definitionally, I mean, what the essence of it is private ownership of the means of production. Now, according to Marx, what that leads to is, wage slavery, exploitation, all that type of stuff. But the fundamental of what capitalism is private ownership of the means of production.
I agree that that's fundamental. But
when do we get? This is what I want to know. This is what I want to just get to this libertarian thing for a second. The term libertarian comes about to refer to basically people that advocate what was traditionally known as classical liberalism until the new liberals took over the term. It wasn't known as classical liberalism, it was known as liberalism until the term was taken over by progressives, right? So you have this term libertarian and it refers to all these things. Now you come and say, no, that's not what it means. It means this. But by what? Now, I think libertarianism is as a concept is done, because it encompasses way too much, way too many people. You have too many edgelords, gatekeepers say, no, you're not a libertarian. This one's not a libertarian. It's happening right now with the Libertarian Party. So I don't even know that term is effective. And it's probably partly because of the open nature of it. Everything that comes in is still libertarianism. And then who the hell knows even what you're referring to? You know what I mean? Yeah, and that's part of the problem.
What I'm doing is I'm closing it in a sense, but I'm not closing it to mean whatever Murray Rothbard endorsed, and that's libertarianism, right? I'm closing it not to the positions of a specific person. I'm closing it to the essential. And I have looked at libertarian literature across the board, and I have recognized that the essential aspect that makes something libertarian as against anti-libertarian is the non-aggression principle. Right.
So Mises was anti-libertarian?
If he rejected the non-aggression principle, yes.
Okay, so do you see that you're going into a definitional circle? You're saying that I discovered through reading libertarians that whoever was a libertarian adhered to the non-aggression principle.
Mises didn't really talk about ethics much at all.
No, but he did talk about ethics.
He was mostly like 90% plus an economist.
He's an economist, but he certainly talked about ethics. He said that value is subjective. He said ethics is subjective.
The first ethicist you get in the Austrian school is Murray Rothbard. If you look at Murray Rothbard, it's non-aggression principle, left, right, and center.
Yeah, but I don't know what that has to do with, because it's the Austrian. That has nothing to do with anything.
We're asking about an ethical position here, though.
Yeah.
Which is libertarianism. So if we're looking for the original libertarian, Mr. Libertarian, that's Murray Rothbard.
But there was libertarians before Rothbard. The concept existed. The word existed prior to Rothbard. So by what standard do we say that Rothbard comes along, gets and he now preempts the concept, preempts the term?
Because he completed the theory.
But hold on, you said earlier, well, not according to him, because according to him, Hoppe did better than he did. So it wouldn't have been completed. But earlier,
but he's wrong with that.
Earlier you said that, well, when I was researching libertarians, I noticed that all libertarians adhered to the non-aggression principle. But then you said you determined whether somebody was a libertarian by whether it's yeah, you did. You said they all adhered to the non-aggression principle.
I said it's the essential.
Yeah, you said it's an essential thing that they all had in common was the non-aggression principle.
To be clear, I didn't say all. I worked out, right? So I looked at what people were calling libertarian literature, and I was reading it. And I was like, oh, yes, I recognize this essential. I had implicitly understood this essential already.
But then I'm
going out implying it.
But then you said you would exclude someone like Mises for not adhering to it, which means that that's your starting point.
I mean, isn't this just Plato's argument? That like, oh, you must have already had the concept to be able to recognize it.
No, not at all. I'm saying that's the way in which you're presenting it. Because Mises would be considered in the tradition of libertarian literature, but then you're saying you would exclude him because he doesn't adhere to the non-aggression principle.
If he is openly rejecting the non-aggression principle, then that is an anti-libertarian stance.
Then that's what you're saying. So how did you then discover that all libertarians were essential? The essential of all of them was adhering to the non-aggression principle
by reading and talking with libertarians. And becoming a libertarian.
So, but if you read Mises, he would have been considered a libertarian, but then you'd exclude him. So how did you know these were libertarians?
If I read Mises, I would just get a bunch of economics and a couple little inklings of, oh, well, we don't really know anything about ethics and you can't know anything about ethics. But here's my feelings.
He wrote far more than just economics. Omnipotent government theory, theory and history were not economics books. But this isn't relevant to the point. The point I'm making is, if you start off and you say, these are all the people that are libertarians, I'm going to investigate them. And what I noticed about them is they all have in common.
I didn't start out with, here's a set of books and I'm going to really go through. I was just interested in the literature.
You're
and I was just going along and I recognized,
right,
like, just in the same way that if I'm walking through a forest, I go, oh, those are trees, you know? Oh, okay, that's a libertarian.
Okay, so then you would say, but you would first have to identify them as trees before you started investigating the essence of them. Right? You had to identify them as something. So you had to start off with these are libertarians while you're looking through them. And then you said you discovered that the NAP was the essential thing. But there were people that were considered libertarians who don't adhere to the NAP. So now you're going to exclude them based on the NAP. Mm-hmm. That's circular.
No, it's not a circle.
It's 100% circular. No, it's not even a doubt about
it. There's a temporal difference here. So the word libertarian in classical philosophy meant that you think there's indeterminism, right? But that's clearly not what libertarian means now.
No, that's not politically, no. But the term libertarian applies to politics predated Rothbard, and in libertarian literature, you would come across Mises, you would come across a Milton Friedman, you would come across Hayek. I don't know Menger because he didn't really write political stuff, but he would have been considered a classical liberal. Frederick Bastiat would be included in there. John Locke would have been included in there. Lysander Spooner would have been included in there. Not all of them adhere to the non-aggression principle. Not indeed. So, but you now are saying if they don't adhere to the non-aggression principle, they're not libertarians. But
here's one way to approach this. Have you ever listened to like a jazz piece where?
No.
Well, I suppose I can just explain.
I haven't, so I'm sorry.
I can explain it. So it's like,
I mean, I've listened to it, but not in the sense you're talking about. No.
There are certain pieces in jazz where, and my friend Eduardo showed me this one time, where it's like they're sort of dancing around the melody and implying the melody by what notes they're playing, and they're playing just around it, right? Those previous thinkers in the libertarian tradition, they were dancing around and playing around the non-aggression principle, but they hadn't identified it. In a very similar way, Aristotle was dancing around the primacy of existence, but he failed to explicitly identify it. Murray Rothbard, in the legal realm, he explicitly identified the non-aggression principle and grounded it in proper science. So that does away with all the errors of previous anarchists and whatnot.
That still doesn't answer my question. My question is, before you decided, or before you discovered the non-aggression principle was the essence of libertarianism, how did you know who the libertarians were?
I just saw them. I knew they were libertarians. Everyone was saying this is libertarianism, and they were pointing at this vague ideology, and they said this is libertarianism, and then I looked at it and I was like, oh, the essential there is the non-aggression principle.
Okay, so when you if somebody came up and wanted to study libertarianism, wouldn't come to a von Mises as part of that?
Very rarely. To be clear, I've met a lot of libertarians. It's not often that their introduction to libertarianism is reading very dense economics textbooks.
No. I didn't say it's not about an introduction because you could have read it. I'm saying it's part of the corpus. When I first was introduced to the whole idea of libertarianism, it was through, first it was from the Foundation for Economic Education, then through laissez-faire books. And that stuff was inundated with Mises. The Mises Institute is named after Mises, even though I have issues with them naming themselves after him and not representing his views. But nonetheless, Mises was always considered to be a libertarian. or in the libertarian tradition.
Right. And that's because Rothbard set up these institutions and he didn't want to call it the Rothbard Institute.
No, that's fine. But even previous to Rothbard, like I said, you had libertarian political philosophy. Mises would have been right in the center of that, but I don't know how.
And they were dancing around the non-aggression principle. They were dancing around
Mises wasn't. He would Mises and Hazlitt would explicitly denounce that as a principle politically. There's no doubt in my mind. They're both utilitarians, both identified as such.
Mises would say, yes, that is a good. He didn't really talk about ethics in proper terms or anything, but he would say, hey, if we're looking for flourishing, then we want this thing, right? We want private property rights and stuff like that, and that is dancing around the non-aggression principle.
He would say, no, because he would still allow for taxation, which is a violation of the non-aggression principle.
When did he allow for taxation?
Well, in human action, for one. I mean, if you do all throughout, not all throughout it, but he certainly allows for taxation. He doesn't say taxation is theft or you shouldn't have taxation.
Right, because he didn't have a proper ethical theory. He was just speaking as an economist.
He debated ethics with Ayn Rand and didn't accept it.
Right, yeah, because he didn't have. Wrong. Yeah, he was rejecting ethics, so he didn't have a proper ethical theory.
No, okay, I see what you're saying. I thought you meant hadn't heard a proper ethical theory. No, he didn't. I agree. He was wrong on ethics, but that doesn't exclude him from being a libertarian, because I don't know how you don't see that this is circular. I really don't. You start off saying that you looked at the libertarians, and by looking at libertarians, you distilled the essence was the non-AP. But by the NAP, you exclude people that were traditionally called libertarians. How?
Because those people were dancing around the non-aggression principle. That is the concept I'm talking about. Dancing around it, right? Not explicitly identifying it.
But they wouldn't accept it.
If they would not accept it. If they had explicitly identified it, then they would.
So you don't think that Mises, well, first of all, Mises had discussed it, so he was aware of it. It's like the people who say he would have been an anarchist had he just been exposed to it.
It's not just had he been exposed to it. Like, he can be a stubborn old bastard, right? That's perfectly fine.
Well, he can be whatever he wants.
If he had identified it, right? If Mises was born, reborn, because if we don't have Mises, then we don't have the rest of it, right? But if Mises was born today again, in the wake of Murray Rothbard and all these other figures, then easily he is a believer in the non-aggression principle.
How can you say that? Well, based on what? What can you possibly base that conclusion on? The man knew Rothbard personally. He debated Ayn Rand on ethics.
He was an old stubborn bastard, right?
Not when he debated with Ayn Rand. So you mean if he was a teenager? Like, how can you make that claim? That's so non-empirical. It's so counterfactual.
Maybe he was just really stubborn and really anti-ethics the whole time. Maybe that's true.
There's no doubt he was stubborn. I grant you that. But the conclusion that you started with, or the statement you started with, is you got to the NAP by studying libertarians, except for the people that you didn't consider libertarians, who most people would consider libertarians. I don't know.
I immediately understood that those people are just being wishy-washy. Like, I can identify wishy-washiness, right? And I can see that
Mises was wishy-washy
on ethics.
He wasn't wishy-washy. He
on ethics, yes, clearly.
No. He might have been wrong.
Which is wishy-washy on ethics. I was looking for ethics.
He clearly said there's no such thing as a moral truth.
I was looking for ethics, right? I was into this. I was looking for ethics. I was looking for this field called law. I understood implicitly that it was a thing, right? And I was enamored with the people who were actually talking about law. Right, so I have to ignored. Omitted.
I'll ask you.
All of these people who are just kind of like, and then we'll kind of have like these. I omit David Friedman. Thank goodness for that, right? Because David Friedman, he doesn't have a single ethic in his bones, and that's why I don't consider him an ANCAP. I was never a David Friedmanite, right? I am omitting all of these people because I understood that they're being very, very wishy-washy, and they're not talking about the actual science.
So David Friedman's not an anarchist in your mind?
He's not.
Well, I don't know. You seem to have your own private understanding of what these terms mean. But I got a question for you, a little side thing. I've seen you comment on argumentation ethics, HAPA. Are you an adherent?
Yes, in a very specific way. So the basic idea is, I won't go through my full non-aggression principle proof here. But
I just wanted to know if you were. I mean, you can explain it if you want, but I just wanted to know if you adhere to it.
I'll give like a brief explanation. So there, like the basic idea is there's three possible solutions you can have to law. It's either going to be law of the jungle, which is just anything goes, whim worship, blah 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 blah. The other possibility might be the non-aggression principle. We can all understand that for the time being. Or mixed law, which is just some sort of, sometimes we should aggress, sometimes we shouldn't, yada, yada, yada. On mixed law, I already have a good argument against every type of mixed law system I've ever identified. They all devolve into primacy of consciousness, so they're all gone. But then also, we can bring in argumentation ethics here, and we can say, well, if anybody is going to be trying to pretend to be a civilized individual and saying, hey, I'm civilized, I'm trying to propose, I'm not a jungle brute who's just going to bash you over the head, and here are the reasons why we should aggress in this situation, that is completely entirely inconsistent. They've just contradicted themselves, which gives them two options, right? Either they can shut up, stop making their arguments for aggression, or they can become a jungle brute. And if they become a jungle brute, then they're back in whim worship, and that is also already negated.
Have you seen my debate with Stefan Kinsella about Hoppian ethics, about argumentation ethic?
Maybe. I do remember. It might have been you and Humor.
Oh yeah, he and we debated anarcho-capitalism. I like Mike Humor too. I like Stefan Kinsella for that matter. Both very, very nice guys.
I think I did see your one with Kinsella.
I actually had Kinsella on twice. Once we debated the argumentation ethic, and the next time we had a discussion about objectivist ethics. But I like him. I think he's a nice guy. Mm-hmm. So are you going to do the Discord thing with the guys in the post conversation, or are you just do you have to just go? I
had only up to like. We're watching Westworld in like a watch group because some people want to watch it. I love that show, and I'm the one streaming it, so I gotta be there,
Oh, all right, buddy. Well, it's just about time for you to go. It's 4 minutes to 5 here. And I don't know how much more we can get into it. I don't even know how we got to where we got to. We start off it's not the first time that's happened to me. You start off with one discussion. Next thing you know, you're talking about your favorite movie. Yeah. I don't know. It's all right with me. Hey, what do you think about, I know what your thoughts on Dave Smith. What do you think about these other libertarian influencers, namely Clint Russell and Josie?
So I maybe shouldn't be too controversial here, so I don't, I'll be controversial. Fuck it. I think most of these types have perhaps a 3-year-old's understanding of ethics. I remember this one clip from Clint Russell where he's talking about the grounding of self-ownership and like property rights and stuff. And he's like, well, so you see, you own yourself, and therefore you own your labor, and therefore you own the things that you mix your labor into. And I was like, Jesus Christ, the fucking portal just opened up to the 1700s. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, no, that isn't how you ground it. Like, we have the vastly more modern thinkers here. Read anything that Kinsella has ever written. Read anything that any of these moderns have ever written. Like, what are you talking about? No, what does it mean to own your labor and to mix labor into things? Like, that's so just like fucking romantic language. Like, shut up. Get away from it. Stop saying that. It's built on scarcity. We have a very great thing called praxeology, right? If you've ever heard of it, half these fucking influencers, Josie, never fucking heard of it, right? None of these cunts have ever fucking heard of this shit. Yes, we have this thing called scarcity, and because we have scarcity, you can have conflicts, and because you can have conflicts, we need a system of property rights to denote who should win in these conflicts, so that we can avoid these conflicts, right? That is the basis of property rights. Not any of this fucking mystical wah-wah wee-wah hoo-ha bullshit of like, oh yes, my soul goes into the tree as I cut it. Like, no, shut up. Jesus Christ.
My biggest critique of Russell is he makes claims that he simply can't prove. That he reads into people's minds, their motivations, and every time I've asked him to present proof, he just gets mad at me. One time he called me, he said he believed I was a federal agent, and he blocked me. Then he unblocked me. But the case in point, calling me a federal agent, at that time I think I was like 10 months off a 25-year prison sentence. Like, if you haven't even done that type of due diligence and you're going to call somebody a federal agent, I mean, how many of his other statements, when I don't know the background, can I believe? You know,
must be very dedicated to the job. So.
yeah, undercover, 25 years. All right, buddy. Hey, thanks for a great discussion, man. We'll have to do it again.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, have a good night.
See ya.
Yeah.
All right, let's whoop.